Have you ever felt that the more you understand, the more alone you become? That the deeper your thoughts drift, the more silence greets you when you speak? It's not in your head. Society has always feared those who see too much, who question too deeply. Not because they are wrong, but because they strip away the comfort of ignorance. From Socrates to Schopenhauer, Galileo to Tesla, brilliant minds have been ridiculed, exiled, erased, not for their mistakes but for their clarity. Intelligence doesn't just illuminate, it exposes. And in a world addicted to illusion, truth is the ultimate threat. Throughout history, society has feared the ones who think too deeply. Not the warriors, not the kings, but the minds that dared to question what others blindly accepted. Socrates was executed, not because he was wrong, but because he encouraged people to ask why. Galileo was silenced, not for falsehoods, but for truths too heavy for the church to bear. Tesla died in obscurity, not because he lacked brilliance, but because his vision threatened the profit of others. Intelligence in its rawest form is not a gift. It is a disruption. It challenges the known. It dismantles the comfortable. It threatens the structures we build to feel safe. But why? Why does a brilliant mind ignite such discomfort in those around it? The answer is not found in politics or power, but in psychology, in the fragile architecture of the human ego. Consider this: stand beside someone physically stronger, and you might admire them. Meet someone wealthy and perhaps you envy them. But meet someone who sees deeper than you do, and suddenly, it's not admiration you feel, it's inadequacy. This is what psychologists call the mirror effect. A deep thinker, even in silence, reflects the limitations of those around them. They don't just introduce new ideas, they reveal what others refuse to see, and this reflection is rarely welcome. When a deep thinker speaks, they do not insult, but they illuminate. And in a world where identity clings to belief, where self-worth is often tethered to intellectual pride, illumination feels like an attack. Unlike wealth or strength, intelligence is internal. It pierces the veil of who we believe we are. We define ourselves by our ideas, our understanding, our truths. So when someone arrives with questions we cannot answer, with insights we cannot grasp, the instinct is not curiosity, it is defense. Ego shields itself not with reason, but with rejection. And so, the deep thinker is met with silence, discomfort, sometimes even hostility. They are dismissed as arrogant, accused of being too serious, labeled as strange, cold, unrelatable. But what is actually being rejected is the confrontation with the self. This is why, time and time again, intellectuals are pushed to the edges of society. Not because they speak falsehoods, but because their presence alone disturbs the fragile balance of belonging. In our ancestral past, survival depended on the tribe. To be accepted was to be protected. To be different was to be alone. Evolution favored conformity over contemplation. Fitting in meant safety. Thinking differently meant danger. This fear lives in us still. Even now, when a deep thinker enters a room, they unknowingly disturb the group dynamic. They don't mean to. But their questions unsettle the unexamined life. Their clarity threatens the illusion of certainty. And so society resists, not the thinker, but the discomfort they awaken. We say we value truth, but what we crave is comfort. We say we honor intelligence, but we reward charisma. We say we want progress, but only the kind that doesn't make us look inward. This is the silent war deep thinkers face, a resistance not of reason, but of fear. For when the lights come on, not everyone is ready to see what's in the room. To understand why society fears deep thinkers, we must look inward, into the mind itself. Intelligence is not like other forms of superiority. It isn't worn on the outside like wealth or beauty. It cannot be measured in pounds lifted or dollars earned. Intelligence lives within. It's woven into how we perceive reality, how we define ourselves. That's why when we encounter someone with a sharper intellect, our response is rarely neutral. Unlike physical strength, which we might admire, or success, which we might aspire to, intelligence hits far more vulnerable. It strikes at the foundation of who we believe we are, because intelligence is tied to thought, and thought is tied to identity. So when someone challenges our beliefs, our logic, or our worldview, it doesn't feel like a conversation, it feels like an assault, and the body reacts accordingly. When we feel intellectually inferior, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, flares to life. This isn't metaphor. The same part of our brain that triggers fight or flight during danger becomes active when our ideas are challenged. Deep thinkers don't just introduce complexity, they trigger a primal fear. Not because they intend to, but because the human brain evolved in tribes, not lecture halls. For most of human history, survival depended on acceptance. Belonging was life, isolation was death. So our minds developed a powerful reflex: conform to the group or risk being cast out. In this light, the presence of a deep thinker is seen unconsciously as a threat to harmony. Their insights become disruptions, their questions become heresies, and society, like an immune system, moves swiftly to neutralize the discomfort. Sometimes with mockery, sometimes with silence, sometimes with violence. And yet the thinker persists. They do not seek to destroy the group, only to understand what the group refuses to see. But that's the tragedy. For all its advances, the human mind remains wired for comfort. We seek out ideas that soothe us, not those that challenge us. This is why people gravitate towards certainty, even when it's shallow. In social settings, confidence is often mistaken for truth. The person who speaks with unwavering conviction is celebrated, while the thinker who speaks with nuance, who wrestles with ambiguity, is often overlooked. In a culture driven by appearances, certainty is loud, but wisdom is quiet. Psychological studies affirm this paradox. One-on-one, people are more open to deep ideas. But in groups, something shifts. The presence of others activates the ego's defenses, social comparison takes over. If someone feels intellectually outshined, they often respond not with curiosity, but with dismissal, sarcasm, or subtle exclusion. Because in groups, it's no longer about truth. It's about status. And intelligence, unless masked, can threaten that delicate social order. So the thinker learns to hide, to soften, to dilute, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Because sometimes the deepest truths must be whispered, not shouted. And sometimes the most powerful minds are not the ones who say the most, but the ones who wait until the world is ready to hear them. Here lies the great paradox of intelligence. The more clearly you see the world, the more invisible you become within it. You strive for truth, for meaning, for understanding, and yet, with every answer you find, the distance between you and others grows. In a society that rewards simplicity, the deep thinker becomes a stranger. You are not rejected because you are arrogant, or cold, or strange. You are rejected because you are unsettling, because your thoughts pierce through the illusions people build their lives upon. Confidence, not complexity, wins the room. Those who speak in absolutes, who offer easy answers and comforting cliches, are applauded, while those who ask difficult questions, who sit with uncertainty, are dismissed as difficult, pessimistic, or worse, irrelevant. This is the strange fate of the intellectual. The more you value truth, the less you are understood. The more clarity you develop, the more disoriented others become in your presence. And this isn't just personal, it's structural. Look at our public figures, our influencers, our leaders. The ones who rise fastest are rarely the most thoughtful, but the most certain. Charisma over depth, volume over insight, performance over principle. Why? Because society doesn't move toward truth, it moves toward what feels good. The deep thinker offers nuance, but nuance requires effort. It demands stillness in a world addicted to speed. It asks people to reconsider, to sit with discomfort. And that is something very few are willing to do. So the thinker becomes the outlier. Not because they push people away, but because they no longer speak the native language of distraction. Most people live at the surface. Conversations hover on the weather, the news, what's trending. But the thinker longs for the ocean floor, for the hidden questions no one wants to ask. And in that depth, they often find loneliness. The irony is painful. The thinker who could offer the most meaning to the world is often the one left speaking into silence. This is the paradox. The brighter your insight, the fewer will see it. The deeper your thought, the more shallow the response. And yet, it is that very discomfort, that very resistance, that proves you are touching something real, something unfiltered, something alive. The rejection is not a mark of failure. It is the natural course of seeing clearly in a world that often prefers to remain asleep. But still, the thinker continues. not because they are celebrated, but because something in them refuses to accept illusion. Because once you have seen the world without its mask, no lie, no comfort, no silence can make you unsee it. To understand the loneliness of intelligence, we must descend into the mind of Arthur Schopenhauer, a man who did not flinch from the darkness, a philosopher who stared straight into the abyss and described what he saw without blinking. While others romanticized reason or praised progress, Schopenhauer whispered a far more unsettling truth. Intelligence is not a blessing, it is a burden, not because it leads to failure, but because it leads to awareness. And awareness, when it becomes too sharp, cuts through the very fabric of what holds most people together. Schopenhauer believed that behind every human action lies the will, a blind, irrational force that drives our cravings, ambitions, attachments, our very urge to live. Most people are puppets of this will. They chase pleasure, status, comfort. They fill their days with distraction, convinced its meaning. But the intelligent cannot unsee. They do not live for comfort, they live for truth. And truth, Schopenhauer said, is rarely kind. The deep thinker sees through the theater of society, the scripted smiles, the meaningless small talk, the status games dressed up as connection. They see the machinery beneath the laughter, the hunger beneath the goals. They recognize that much of what society calls progress is only the will in disguise. To the intelligent, this realization is not liberating, it is isolating. For how do you speak to a world that doesn't want to listen? How do you connect with those who are comforted by illusions you can no longer believe in? As Schopenhauer wrote, a high degree of intellect tends to make a man unsocial, not by choice, but by necessity. The more one understands, the less one belongs. The more truth one sees, the harder it becomes to participate in a society built on pretense. And so, the intelligent often find themselves wandering alone through a world where few speak their language, a language not of facts or figures, but of silence, depth, and existential honesty. Where others find joy in routine, they feel the weight of repetition. Where others chase desire, they ask what lies beneath it. Where others cling to hope, they question its foundation. And yet, Schopenhauer did not advocate despair. He did not say, abandon the world. He said, see it clearly and choose your path wisely. He offered 3 paths for the deep thinker. First, embrace solitude, not as punishment, but as a sanctuary, a space where the mind can roam freely, unchained by society's demands. Second, find kindred spirits, not in the masses, but in rare souls, in books, in forgotten corners of philosophy and art where truth still breathes. And third, speak wisely. Share your insights not recklessly, but with precision. For not every ear is ready to hear, and not every heart is ready to hold what you see. For Schopenhauer, intelligence was a double-edged sword. It gave the power to see clearly, but demanded the strength to carry what was seen. To think deeply is to suffer consciously. But within that suffering, he believed, was also the seed of wisdom, and perhaps the only kind of freedom worth having. If intelligence creates isolation, society does not merely allow it. It builds systems that ensure it. From the moment we are born, we are shaped not to think freely, but to fit in. The education system claims to value curiosity, but beneath the slogans and standardized tests lies a different truth. Schools do not reward thinking, they reward compliance. The child who questions too much, who lingers on uncomfortable ideas, is told to stay on task. The student who memorizes and repeats advances. The one who explores and challenges disrupts. Intelligence becomes a liability when it cannot be measured in grades or controlled by curriculum. And so, the young thinker learns early. Truth has a cost, depth has a price. Better to stay quiet than risk standing alone. The message is subtle but constant. Obedience over originality, performance over perspective, memorization over meaning. We do not educate to liberate, we educate to replicate. And when that child grows into an adult, the institutions change shape, but not direction. The corporate world does not seek visionaries, it seeks culture fit. Not the ones who ask why, but those who ask how high. Innovation is praised only when it doesn't challenge profit. Dissent is tolerated only when it is decorative. To climb the ladder, one must rarely think. One must belong. And so, Intelligence is forced to wear a mask, a disguise of The brilliant employee who sees the flaws in a system learns to stay silent because truth in a boardroom is often unwelcome. And beyond the walls of business, in the public square, the message echoes louder. Politics rewards not the wisest, but the most palatable. The leader who speaks uncomfortable truths rarely wins, but the one who mirrors the crowd's emotions, who sells certainty and comfort, rises. In every institution, from classroom to conference room to campaign stage, truth is filtered. Not because it is wrong, but because it is dangerous to what is already built. This is the tragedy. Society claims to love the thinker, but it only loves their ideas after they are safe. We celebrate Galileo now, but we imprisoned him then. We worship Van Gogh's paintings, but he died alone, unheard. Tesla gave us the future and was left behind by the present. What all of them share is not just genius, but rejection. Not because they were flawed, but because they were early. Too early for a society built to preserve, not evolve. And this raises a painful truth. Intelligence, real intelligence, is not nurtured by society. It survives despite it. It must navigate institutions that stifle depth, that exalt illusion, that reward the familiar, and it must do so quietly, strategically, often alone. Because the moment you begin to think beyond the system begins to think against you. History remembers them now, their names carved into textbooks, whispered in reverence. But in their own time, they walked alone, not because they lacked vision, but because they saw too far. Socrates asked simple questions, but those questions cracked the foundations of Athens. What is justice? What is virtue? What do you truly know? Questions that exposed ignorance in the educated and discomfort in the powerful. For this he was condemned, not for violence, not for heresy, but for making people think. Given the chance to flee, he stayed. He drank the poison, and in doing so became immortal. His final words: "The unexamined life is not worth living." That is what he died for. Galileo, centuries later, would face a similar fate. He pointed his telescope toward the heavens and shattered the illusion of a geocentric universe. What he saw was truth. What others saw was threat. The church, fearing the collapse of its cosmic authority, forced him to recant. They could not kill him, so they buried his ideas in silence. He spent his final years under house arrest, a prisoner for seeing too clearly. Then came Nietzsche, a mind so radical even now we struggle to contain it. He declared that traditional morality was a construct, that God as we knew him was dead, that power, not piety, shaped the soul. He saw that most people lived by comforting lies and dared to say it out loud. For that he was dismissed as mad, dying alone, misunderstood, his brilliance only unearthed after death. Tesla, too, knew the cold silence of isolation. He envisioned a world of free, wireless energy, a world unchained from profit. But those in power did not want revolution, they wanted control. And so, his funding dried up, his name was erased. Others made fortunes using fragments of his genius, while Tesla died in a hotel room, feeding pigeons, speaking to ghosts of ideas never realized. Alan Turing cracked the code that helped end a war, only to be destroyed by his own country for being different. The father of modern computing, driven to suicide by the same system he had saved. It wasn't his mind they feared, it was what he represented, the intersection of brilliance and otherness. And long before all of them, there was Hypatia of Alexandria, a woman who dared to teach reason in an age ruled by fear, a philosopher, mathematician, astronomer whose clarity was seen as sorcery. She was dragged from her carriage by a mob, her flesh torn by broken tiles, her mind silenced by fire and blood. Not because she was wrong, but because she stood too tall in a world that needed her bow. These stories are not rare, they are the rule. Time and time again the thinker arrives too early, and society responds too slowly. The irony is almost unbearable. The minds we now celebrate, we once silenced. The truths we now praise were once crimes. Intelligence does not die in silence, it dies in resistance. And only later, when the danger has passed, when the ideas can be packaged, when the thinker is safely buried, do we begin to listen. But by then, it is no longer for them. It is for us. And if we do not learn from them, we are doomed to repeat their exile. So what now? If the world rejects those who think deeply, if intelligence is misunderstood, silence feared, what does that mean for you? The one who sees through the illusion, who feels the weight of clarity. Are you doomed to walk alone? Not at all. But to survive this world as a deep thinker, you must understand the terrain and learn to walk it wisely. First, embrace solitude, not as exile but as sanctuary. The noise of the world often drowns out truth. In solitude, thought becomes clearer. The inner world deepens. Schopenhauer did not see solitude as emptiness. He saw it as freedom, a space where the thinker can meet their own mind without interruption, without compromise. If the crowd cannot hear you, it does not mean your voice is wrong. It may mean your voice was never meant for the crowd. Second, seek your kindred. You do not need millions to understand you. You only need the few, the rare souls who recognize depth when they feel it. They may be found in quiet friendships, in old books, in long-forgotten letters from minds who lived and suffered as you do. Every thinker who ever felt alone left behind a breadcrumb of thought. Trace them. Let them remind you. You are not the first. You are not alone. Third, speak wisely. The truth is powerful, but not everyone is ready to hold it. You are not obligated to share every insight. Sometimes silence is strength. Sometimes restraint is wisdom. Learn the rhythm of the room. Not every setting is soil for deep roots. Save your most meaningful thoughts for those who can water them. And when you do speak, do so not to impress, but to connect. Remember what Einstein said. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Complexity does not require complication. Truth, when mastered, becomes elegance. Fourth, protect your mind. This world does not always reward depth. It will ask you to perform, to shrink, to trade insight for applause. Resist that temptation. Intelligence is not performance. It is perception. And the thinker's task is not to entertain, but to illuminate. Finally, trust the timeline of truth. You may not be understood now. Your words may echo in empty rooms. But time has a strange way of circling back to those who were once cast aside. Many of the greatest minds in history were not heard until long after they were gone. But their ideas outlived the laughter. Their questions outlasted the silence. In the end, it is not the crowd that defines the thinker. It is the courage to think despite the crowd. So, if you see more than others see, do not hide. Do not bend your mind to fit into a world that was never built to hold it. Instead, build your world around that mind. Let your solitude be sacred. Let your insight be disciplined. Let your voice be deliberate. The world may not reward deep thinking today, but it needs it desperately. And in time, even the silence may begin to listen. So if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own conversations, if your silence has been mistaken for arrogance, if your depth has been dismissed as difficulty, understand this: you are not broken. You are awake. Society may not be built for you, but it has always been reshaped by those like you. The ones who see before others are ready. The ones who speak truths the world isn't yet willing to hear. Intelligence will not always be embraced, but it will always be necessary. And sometimes, the most revolutionary thing a thinker can do is to keep thinking. So take your place, not in the crowd, but in the lineage of those who endured silence and lit the path anyway. If these words echoed something you felt, share them. Start a conversation. Let others know. There is nothing wrong with thinking deeply. In fact, it may be the very thing that keeps the world from falling asleep. And if you want to journey further with the minds who challenged the world before it was ready, hit that subscribe button. This is only the beginning.